All right, everybody, welcome back to another edition of the GDIY podcast presented by Standing Stone Supply. Returning this week is Jordan Horak from Cato Outdoors. Jordan, how you doing, bud?
Hey, I'm doing well, Nick. Glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably been close to a year since we've had you back on. I think we had an episode talking puppies last year, which got a huge response. People still love that episode, but
Oh, good.
I should have looked before we jumped on here. I can't recall when that
Yeah, I
was.
don't. My Springer is almost a year old. I think she's 11 months. So it's probably 8 months ago we did that.
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, because I think Quinn, I had just gotten her, so that sounds about right. About 8 months, and
Okay. Okay.
so real quick, kind of catch me up. How's the Springer doing? Is she on track and everything you hoped it'd be?
Yeah. Yeah, she is. She's by far the nicest Springer I've had, and everything is going well. We had a little. So we had a lot happening from a business standpoint. We actually relocated back in April, and I could never recommend to anybody to relocate a house with 4 kids and I don't even know how many dogs and way too many hobbies plus a business on top of that. But we did all that in 1 month, and that was it was a tough time to keep all the balls in the air, so to speak.
Yeah,
So my daughter was doing a lot of work with the Springer. Her name is Shani for me. And when we got to the new place and I started going out with her more with the dog and my daughter, I could tell this dog was she was a little bit much for my daughter. So I kind of pulled her back and did a little bit of a reset with her. And yeah, she's man, she is a pounder. I've posted a couple of videos of her like launching for balls out of the air, doing some dummy launcher work and stuff like that. And yeah, she's not a year old yet, but she's crazy talented. I really, really like her.
yeah. So
So
that was going to be my next question when life gets that busy and hectic, because I think that's something that we can all relate to at some point, to where we have this dog, it's got to get trained. Life gets in the way, though. How do you kind of come above that? And it sounds like your daughter came
I
through and
used
helped you
I
out.
used my daughter. Yeah, yeah. So
So
if you don't have a kid like that, you're on your own. But for me, that's my default.
yeah. So I mean, when you decided to hit rewind or start all the way
Yeah.
over and recycle, what was that process like? Did you just go all the way back to square one, or did you just go back onto whatever she was working on in that instance?
Yeah, she'd already, so the dog knew how to do quite a few things at that point, but you'll see this with some, like there's some dogs that are super compliant, and it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's like a 5-year-old kid that's working with them. My daughter is, I think she's 13. She is 13. But it doesn't matter if it's a little kid or an elderly person or somebody who's like really in the prime of their life. Like the dog responds the same way. And then there's other dogs that are a little bit of a handful. And this one is definitely a little bit of a handful and not really a dog that would be super well suited to kids. So a lot of it was just relationship stuff. Like she would really just try to jerk my daughter's chain, like
Uh,
bringing the ball in, but dancing around and acting like she couldn't hear her. And just, it was just like little crap like that. So I didn't have to teach the dog a lot of stuff to get her up to speed. It was more just, let's slow everything down. I actually, you know how for like an 8-week-old puppy, you might sit your butt on the ground and have them come back and jump in your lap with a tennis ball or something
yeah.
like that. I did stuff like that with her. So I got way down on her level, had her come in, didn't accept the retrieve or the delivery until she was really kind of like almost pushing into me and snuggling into me a little bit. And then I would take it. And if she screwed around, like I wouldn't accept that, maybe a little bit of a verbal correction. And, we can't continue the game until you do it my way. And it honestly took only a few days for her to be like, oh, okay, I see the rules have changed a little bit. And since then we've really been able to do more age appropriate drills with her. It was
Yeah.
just taking a little bit of a step back to make sure she was like on the same page with me.
How would you begin to kind of advise maybe a beginner, somebody that hasn't had their hands on a lot of dogs, to where they try to troubleshoot and figure out why is that dog maybe not coming and handing off very well, or minding you very well? Is it a lack of respect to you, or is it an avoidance issue, or does it really not matter? It kind of ends up in the same place either way.
No, it definitely does. It definitely does matter. This is like, it's not the secret sauce, but it kind of is the secret sauce. Like if only there was a shortcut for me to be like, yeah, like, hey, you've only had two dogs, but here's how you can read dogs as well. Somebody who's owned 100 dogs, like
Right.
that'd be awesome. Um, and it is weird. Like some dogs, I've had dogs where you would think that dog is so soft and just really just needs like slow and encouragement and just build up, build up, build up, right? And come to find out later on, like the dog wasn't actually soft. The dog was just extremely manipulative, for
Right.
lack of a better way to express that. I don't know that dogs actually manipulate, but I had misread that dog, and it wasn't so much that it was soft; it was just taking advantage of acting like it was soft, right? And I mean, even dogs that might piddle a little bit, things like that, like really displaying soft characteristics. They're not always soft. Sometimes they're just playing you. And then on the flip side, I've had dogs where you'd be like, wow, there's nothing that's going to phase that dog. Like that thing is tough as nails and there's not a soft bone in its body. And I think a lot of times you'll see a really high powered dog and you automatically assume that a really high powered dog is a hard dog or a tough dog. And that's not necessarily the case at all. So even the Springer that I have right now, it's interesting. Like she isn't, she's not soft per se, but at the same time, like she doesn't like it when I tell her no. She responds. She responds really, really well. Like just a little like okay, okay, that's all she needs. And like, and then
Yep.
typically she won't go back and do that behavior again. But if you just watched her run, same with my dog Grizz. This guy up here on the wall,
Mm.
he is a pounder. He runs so hard, and you would think, man, that dog is tough as nails and like could take any sort of pressure and like no problem, right? But he's actually kind of a soft dog too. So there's I guess to answer the original question, like how do you know? You don't necessarily know. Even like I don't know, and you don't know all the time. But
Right.
I think the best trainers are adaptable. So we try something, and if that doesn't work, like we're not gonna just keep doing that thing and
Hmm.
hoping that someday it's gonna work. Like if it's a process, if we read the dog right and we're using a process that's gonna work for that dog, typically we're gonna see results fairly quickly, right? So we
Yeah.
don't need to keep doing the same thing for a week and have the dog just continue to like not respond to it. Like typically the dog's gonna respond more quickly. So I mean I know we've talked about this in other episodes, but like as a dog trainer, we should adapt to the dog that's in front of us. So
Yep.
read the dog. Is it responding? How is it responding? Is it what we want? Is it not what we want? And then, I spend a lot of time like not with dogs, but thinking about dogs and like, okay, what can I do next? And what maybe could I do that be a little bit creative to help this dog with this issue, whatever that might be. So
Yeah.
it's not just so much the time that we're spending with the dog, which certainly is that, but it's also like the strategizing outside of those training sessions.
Yeah, because they're constantly reading us too. We need to be constantly
Hmm.
reading them because they're constantly reading us. And just because you think you have a dog figured out doesn't mean that they're gonna start when you give them an inch, they're gonna take a mile, right? And so, like here recently, my short hair, she's 10 years old right now, and I'm just doing some drills in the backyard or whatever, and she started popping on some drills. I was just doing some duck search drills with some bumpers. I've talked about it on the podcast a few times, but
Okay.
essentially what she was doing is she would just go out and she would do a handful of them, and then after that, she's just like, I don't want to do it. And I got caught up in that. We talk about like, well, let's backtrack, always look to yourself first. What are we missing here? Like she's really acting confused, even though I know she shouldn't be. And after a few times of really trying to dumb it down and she's still doing that behavior, I'm like, all right, she's just trying to play me right now. And I had to go back to, nope, you've been forced to pile. Like we're gonna figure this out. And you made her do it. And it was kind of a gut check moment to where it just reminded her it's been a while since I've had to force her through something that I knew that she was capable of, and she was just kind of balking and flipping me the bird, so to speak. And
Okay.
it was really interesting though that it popped up after so many years to where it's just like we've never really had this issue, and then it popped up and it was just like, no, you're gonna do it. I know you're doing this. We did the checklist, didn't have to make it any easier or dumb it down, so to speak. And she went back to normal, after a come to Jesus meeting, so to speak.
Sure. Yeah, and I mean, sometimes that can be gender specific, like the older females in particular. I would say that I train them less and less as they get older, the females in particular, because they don't respond as well to it. Like when they're not like for my training, like I want the dog to enjoy what we're doing, right? Like if I'm
Yeah.
having to force it, if I'm butting heads with it, like I did something wrong along the way. And like as they get like right now, I have this female Gandhi. She's I got to do the math quick. I think she's 7 years old. She's 6 or 7, and phenomenal hunting dog. I mean, like out of all the dogs that I have right now, like that's the one that I would want to hunt with the most, right? Like that's going to be the most productive hunting with her. She's also the worst at doing drills because you can tell she comes out and she's just like, look, we've already done this.
Yep.
Like I know how to do everything pretty much, and like this isn't fun for me, right? Like I'd rather just snoop around and like whatever. So
Yeah.
for that dog, like if I only had her, it might be a little bit different. But for her, it's like, you know what, girl, like I know you can do it too. Like, what's the point, right? So let's go
Yeah.
have some fun, and like you can screw around and go sniff, piles of grass or whatever, and I'm not gonna really care. But for a younger dog, for sure, like they don't have the skills. So like, yeah, you got to work with me. You can't
Yep.
just choose to not work because you don't know anything yet, right?
Right.
I would say, if somebody has a dog, like let's say just the average listener out there had my Springer named Shaney, and they're trying to figure out, like, man, how do I get control of this dog? She really seems to be jerking my chain and like not responding really well. Typically, making everything smaller. I like to say like a sterile environment. So like give her less opportunities to do the wrong thing. So if I'm struggling with recall with a dog like that, I'm not going to go out in an open field with a bunch of distractions and work on recall there. That's silly, right? Like
Yeah.
for instance, when we moved out to this new place, there were killdeer everywhere, and they're noisy because they're trying to make nests and they're trying to lure dogs away from their nests. So you can hear the killdeer all over the place. And this Springer would like lose her mind, like chasing these stupid birds, right? Well, if I'm working on recall, let's not go where there's a bunch of killdeer flying around and making their noise because that's not a good environment to teach that, right? Way better to go into a backyard where there's a chain link fence and everything's controlled. There's nothing really to distract her, and like let's work on it there. And then also like Cato boards, which I mean, it's a great tool, a platform, because we can take a Cato board anywhere, we can put it down. So this is what I did with Shaney at the new place. Rather than just taking her out and telling her, don't chase the killdeer, I go out with a Cato board or a couple of Cato boards, put those down, then bring her out, and I can redirect her to a platform instead of just letting her chase a killdeer. I'm probably not going to go out there and throw retrieves for her with killdeer flying around or whatever bird, whatever distraction. This happens to be killdeer in this instance, but I'm not going to go out there and throw retrieves for her because she's probably going to make a choice that I would rather chase that bird than pick up that dummy, right? So I'm
Yeah.
not going to do that. But I am the Cato board is a little bit more well, it's smaller. It's close into me. I'm not sending her out to it and hoping she makes the right choice. I'm bringing her in, putting her on the platform, having her go to another one, back to the original one, maybe a short, like 5 foot retrieve. But really, what I'm trying to do is just get engagement and get her working with me, playing with me. And then at the end, we're going to go back in the crate or we're going to go back in the run instead of just saying, okay, free, go chase the killdeer. Like, nope, when we come out here, you focus on me, we play together, we do these things together. And then when we're done, you go back, into your confined area. I go back into my confined area, the house or whatever. So
Yeah.
doing games like that really takes away the choice from the dog. So the dog doesn't get to decide, do I want to go chase a bird? Or do I want to go chase that kid on his bike or, chase the squirrel or whatever?
Yeah.
We're kind of taking that choice away from the dog and making it so that the only choice they have is to play the game with us. And they might resist that for a little bit, but it's amazing. Like given enough repetitions of that, like right now we'll go out and killdeer will fly off and she'll look at them and then she looks right back at me. So,
Yeah.
but it took a month to get there.
And sometimes it takes that. And I mean, just the prevention of it. You know that if we go out in that situation, then, this will present itself. I don't want that. And so you're just constantly requiring that engagement from the dog. And that's why redirects work so well. If somebody redirects, that's something I've touched on previously with Grace and Guy or long ago on an episode. That's something that I need to
Okay.
need to recycle and touch on again, because it's amazing how sometimes you can be sitting there trying to recall a dog and maybe they don't even care. You know, they're just blowing it off.
Yeah.
But you give them a
Yeah.
place or just some other kind of command, you redirect their attention, and then all of a sudden you have it again. It takes, you know, an example like that for a lot of people to kind of catch on that sometimes, hey, don't just keep repeating the same command or setting them up for failure. You know, come up with a fun drill that keeps them occupied and focused on you and the task at hand.
Yeah, and keeping it small is so important, because if they're 40 yards away and we're trying to regain control, that's exponentially more difficult than if they're 4 yards away, right? Like, it's not 10 times harder, it's like 100 times harder.
Exactly.
That distance. So
yeah, exactly.
yeah, I guess, a lot of times with dog training, it's like, yeah, it's if you just understand people, you can understand how to train dogs, and that's really, really true. But I guess it would kind of not be true in this case, because, like, as a human, I can say, like, hey, Nick, don't do that, whatever that thing is, right? And you can be like, okay, Jordan doesn't want me to do that. I'll go find something else to do, right? But with a dog, if we say don't do that, dogs don't think that complex where they can say, like, oh, he doesn't want me to do that. I'll go find something else to do, right?
Yeah.
They don't, like, they're really fixed on that thing that they're doing. So when we redirect and say, hey, don't do that, but do this instead, that's a lot easier concept for a dog. They're not creative enough to come up with their own thing necessarily. Some might
Yeah.
be, but for the most part, if we can give them an alternative, it makes it a lot easier for them to make that decision.
Yeah. And an example that someone listening to this is probably all too familiar with is somebody ringing the doorbell or knocking on the door. Dogs go crazy, barking. You can sit there and just, no, stop. And the dog just keeps on going. But it's amazing if the dog's place trained, go put them on the place or kennel or something like that. And it's amazing how quickly that gets cleaned up. But
that's right.
we could talk about stuff like this all day long. You and I both know that we can go on some tangents, but we came here today to talk about dummy launchers, and I guess the importance and the uses and probably ill-advised uses of them as well. What, you reached out to me, you shot me a text like, hey, I want to talk dummy launchers. I'm like, all right, cool, that sounds fun, let's do it. What is going on in your training regiment right now that has the dummy launcher up front for you?
So the dummy launcher is a tool that I use probably more than it's probably the most indispensable training tool that I have, aside from platforms or Cato boards. Like, Cato boards I start with when they're 8 weeks old. I'm not doing that with a dummy launcher. But by the time a dog is like 7 or 8 months old, the dummy launcher is probably involved with close to half of the training sessions that I do. And I've seen a lot of stuff lately on social media. I know people are using them, and I thought, this would be a fun thing to talk about. I've used them a lot over the last probably 12 years, 13 years. I mean, we're talking tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of rounds being shot through them. And there's quite a few little tricks that I've come up with. And I thought, this would be something that would be helpful to people. And it'd be a little bit unique. So a lot of podcasts have done in the past more talk about training theory. And this one is going to be really objective, talking about one hard physical object and how it can be used. And I thought that might be fun. I am kind of planning on you being a little bit like my therapist, because it's not like you're replacing one. You would be my only therapist, just to be clear. But when I tried to, like, strategize in my head a little bit for this podcast, like, my thoughts were all over the place. So I'm hoping you can kind of just pull some of this stuff out as we go along. But
too easy, man. That's what I'm here for. I don't know if that qualifies me as a therapist or not, but I'm good at asking a bunch of questions.
Yeah. Okay. Good. So I think this will be fun, and I am sure that people will walk away with at least one thing that they can try with a dummy launcher, and some people may walk away with a bunch of things.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Well, let's start off with the obvious. For those that aren't familiar with dummy launchers, because there's a few differences in styles, right? Like, there's a few options out there on the market. Let's start off with the overall, like, design and the options that if somebody was to go Google dummy launchers, what could they expect to find?
Okay, so there's two different types really. There's the handheld dummy launcher, which is what I want to talk about today, and then there's remote launchers as well. Like Thunder Launcher makes a remote one. I actually have a couple of those as well. I just don't use them that much. So to so yeah, there's the handheld, and then there's the remote. Within the handheld dummy launchers, I know some of you were recording this video as well, and some people may see the video. So I do have an example here with me that I'll hold up, but I'm also going to try to describe it verbally. But there's really two types of handheld launchers. There's the plunger style, so you hold that in one hand and then you pull back the plunger and you let go, and that strikes the cap or the blank, and that then it launches the dummy. I like to use, I'm going to hold this one up. It's the Lucky Launcher 2, I guess. This one has more of a butt on it that I guess technically you're supposed to be able to put it on your shoulder like this and shoot it like a gun. I I don't hold it. I don't do that. One, maybe I'm weak, but like sometimes with the really hot blanks, it kind of hurts my shoulder, and I don't have the rubber piece here anymore. So I usually just hold it in one. I hold the butt in one hand, and then I hold the pistol grip in the other hand, and I shoot it that way. Um, I like this one because I feel like I have really good control over where I'm aiming it, and as we'll talk about later, like shot placement with the launcher can be really important for certain things. So yeah, so this is the one I like, the Lucky Launcher. If you got a plunger style one, that's going to work too. If you got remote launchers, somebody else can do another podcast about those someday.
Yeah.
So there, and then when we start talking, as long as we're talking about the hardware, there's two main types of dummies that I use. There's going to be the canvas type like this. There's nothing on it. There's no tail. There's no head or anything like that. And then there's these that are more of like torpedo style. I think they're made out of PVC of some sort. This one, the PVC one, is going to go a long ways. Like sometimes it goes a long, long ways if you get into a hot blank. Like the other day, I launched one and I paced it off, and I think it went 120 yards from
Yeah.
where I was standing. And I was already like 10 yards out in front of the dog. So it turned into like a little BB in the air, 130 yards away. Actually failed that retrieve, or at least had to be handled to it. The canvas ones don't go nearly as far because there's a lot more wind drag on these, and they're not as heavy. So most of my trainings with the canvas dummy. Now within the canvas dummy, there's different sizes. So I think this is probably an 8-inch one, maybe 7 inches. I'm just kind of eyeing it up here. There's others that are like 10 inches long. The longer ones, all they do is they just don't go as far. They'll actually go quite a bit less far. So I typically don't use those unless I'm working on something really specific. So those are the two types, probably about a 7-inch canvas one, and then the PVC one. The canvas ones, I wear these out. Like you can see, this one's already starting to separate inside. So they don't last forever, but they're relatively cheap. I think they're like $20. There
Yeah.
are other types of dummies out there. Like I have this one. I don't even know where it came from. I'm pretty sure I did not buy it. It's a dummy that has wings sewn on it, and it also has a head on it. Looks like RRT Launchers makes it. I never use this because the wings and the head really don't do anything for me, and all they do is serve to like slow this thing down big time in the air. So it's probably going to go only half the distance of a comparable regular canvas dummy. So if it were me, I would not pay the extra for the wings and for the head. I also have this one right here. Also, don't know where this one came from. It looks like a duck, but it's made out of more hard rubber, kind of like a docking dummy almost. Maybe
I was
just a
about to
little
say,
bit
it looks like
harder.
it's just a little docking version of it.
Yeah, it's not docking though, because it's a little bit heavier than a docking would be, but it's similar. I also, it looks like there's a hole through the middle of it, so maybe there was wings in there at some point. I never use this as well because it doesn't go very far, and it doesn't do anything for me. So really just the PVC torpedo style and then the canvas dummy are the two that I use. And as my plan is, as we go through this podcast, I'll talk more about how I use those two different dummy types. But
Well,
that's really it.
I was about to
Yep.
say, just for clarification, while we're on it, is there any concern on the canvas version, like we would talk about a normal hand thrown canvas bumper, in terms of getting it wet, throwing it in the water? They talk about mold or anything getting in that canvas bumper because it's not fully waterproof. I don't know how much you ascribe to
I
that thought process.
I've never had that happen. Like I would imagine if you get it wet and then you throw it in a drawer somewhere and leave it, that
Yeah.
could happen. I my stuff that rarely gets put in drawers. It's usually
Yeah.
about where I ended training, not really close. Uh, I think as long as you leave them out, I've never had like a mold issue or anything like that. I will say when these things start to get wet, they don't go nearly as far. So I'm I'm usually not shooting these like intentionally out into a body of water. Like you're probably going to get one good launch, and then after that, they're going to go like a third of the distance if you're
Yeah.
sending it into the water. So I don't know why that is. I mean, I have theories. I don't know exactly why, but they do perform better if you keep them dry.
Yeah. And then you keep talking about distance, launching distance, and then you talk about
Yep.
blanks and maybe getting a hot blank. Can you describe to us the different types of blanks and what each kind of rating means or coloration means? What do you use on
Yeah.
what type of launcher?
So there's I think the three main colors would be yellow, I'm sorry, green, yellow, and then red. And I think there's a brown one as well. And there might be one more color, but those are the three main ones. I only use the yellow ones, to be honest. The green
Okay.
ones I find like don't really have enough power at all. And then the red ones are gonna, especially with the canvas dummy, they're gonna rip the dummy apart too quickly. So, and I don't think there's a lot of pressure in those red ones. I'm not sure how safe it is to use them. If they're probably fine, I don't know. But like I feel more comfortable using the yellow ones, and I can create the distance I want using yellow. You
And that
can. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say that's exactly what my question was. Like if you only focus on one, then you kind of know this is the distance I'm working at. The placement, which we're going to get to here in a little while, it's
Yep.
easier to judge because you're not constantly switching back from green, yellow, red, and then you're not putting a
Yeah.
red in when you think a green is in, and vice versa, and all that stuff. So most of the people that I know that uses these kind of go with your frame of mind to where they just pick one color and stick with it.
Yeah, and even within like so I being a cheap quad, I just buy my blanks from the hardware store.
Uh,
So you can get
yeah,
22 blanks for like a nail gun. I'm sure that Lucky Launcher doesn't recommend that, and I'm not like you make your own choices out there. I'm not endorsing anything, but I think there's some quality issues because you'll have some that are just like complete pansies, and they'll send the dummy 30 yards, and then the next one sends it 80 yards. So there can be a lot of variance. Frankly, I don't really care because I don't really like patterns when I'm teaching when we're working on marking drills. So if it's always going 70 yards, that's not really super helpful to me because the dog is going to start going 70 yards and then looking. So it doesn't really matter to me if there's variables to that. If it's anywhere from 30 to 100 yards, it's like that's fine. The dog should have to figure out any of those, right?
right.
And yeah, so yeah, I just stick with yellow. That's all
Yeah,
I have.
I got you. So you're kind of leaning in towards the different uses for canvas versus the little PVC footballs, almost the torpedoes as you called it. Uh,
Yeah.
Describe which different scenarios are you using those for?
So if you don't mind me, like maybe we can like start at the beginning, like how we introduce it, and then work
Yeah,
up
that's a better way to
because
do it anyway.
that'll be a little more linear for me, and
Yeah,
and really like for the listener out there, the last thing I want a listener to do is like go on Soggy Dog or Dog Supply or Standing Stone and buy a dummy launcher and go out there and just start blasting away. So
yeah,
let's talk about how we introduce it and then build up to more complex retrieves. So
absolutely.
I don't want to go out there with a young puppy and just launch and just start launching these things. They are extremely loud. Like you do want hearing protection in, like just trust me. And if you do shoot these things without hearing protection, like you're an idiot and don't plan on listening to your grandkids ever because you are going to go deaf. Like they're extremely loud. So if they're that loud for me, like they're going to be that loud for a puppy as well. So I have no use like taking a 3 or 4 or even a 5-month old puppy out and just launching these things. Sure, the majority of them are going to be fine, some of them are not, and the ones that aren't fine, you may cause irreparable like gun shy damage, right? So
Yep.
I don't get in a hurry. But let's say that puppy is now 6 or 7 months old. They're real confident. They're retrieving well. You feel they're if you want them to be line steady and wait to be sent for a retrieve, you've accomplished that. They're sitting there, they're steady. So okay, we're ready for the dummy launch now. What I'm gonna do, what I don't want to do is go out, take that dummy, put that yellow blank in, aim my dummy launcher up at a 45 degree and just send it, right? Because there's going to be a loud bang. The dummy leaves there at a really high rate of speed. I mean, I'm not sure what the muzzle velocity is, but it's fast. And then obviously it slows down really quickly as well because it doesn't have very good aerodynamics. But if the dog is looking at me and I launch that, the dog may not even see the dummy leave the muzzle because it's leaving so quickly, right? And so now all they have is a loud bang and they don't see the retrieve or anything like that. So I want to avoid that at all costs. So what I'll do, I'll go to a mowed field where it's like really easy to see, maybe even a dirt field. I'm not looking for any complexity here. I'm just looking for success. So I put the dog or the puppy on a Cato board and I'm going to walk in front of it like 20 yards, like quite a ways out to the front. And I'm going to launch the dummy really low, like 3 feet off of the ground. And I'm going to launch it straight away from where the puppy is. So even if that puppy gets a little bit startled because of the noise and wants to look at me, when looks at me, it's still going to see the dummy going away from me, right? So what I don't want to shoot away from the puppy so that it gets startled, looks at me, and never even sees the dummy. So if in that puppy sight picture it sees me and it sees the dummy, I know it's going to see the dummy. So we launch it really low. It's almost like a rabbit, it hits the ground and it's bouncing and it looks exciting. The puppy might break even if it's been line steady. I'm normally going to let it break that first time or two because it was a big, exciting thing. And
Yeah.
I don't want there to be any negatives associated with this. Right. So if it breaks, fine, go get the dummy, bring it back. So good dog. It comes back. I get the dummy, put it back on the Cato board, do the same thing. And that might be a session right there. But if the dog was steady, it looked really comfortable, it was unfazed by it, I might start to increase the complexity a little bit, shoot at a little bit of a higher angle, maybe move back toward the puppy a little bit, but I'm not going to get in a hurry. Like this is a marathon. So really that first session, if we can just have the dog keep its focus on where the dummy goes and make the retrieve and bring it back, that's great. And I don't care if it's a 20-yard retrieve. Up. Jamie. The beauty of this, I don't really have to do much for intro to gun stuff later on because the puppy loved to retrieve already. Now that loud bang is associated with a retrieve, and they learn to actually love that sound more than like be fearful or timid of it, right? But it is really important. Like you do not want to go out, put that puppy on a Cato board, stand over top of it, and blast off around because most likely you're gonna startle the dog. It's gonna start looking around to figure out where the noise came from while the dummy is like bouncing down the field. And you try to send it, it doesn't even know what it's being sent for. Like, trust me, I've seen this and I think I've done it a long time ago. But if you go way out to the front, and, you could do this if you have somebody that can help you. Like if your dog wants to come to you instead of staying there on the platform while you move 20 yards to the front of it, you could have somebody else go 20 yards in front or 30 or 40 yards with the launcher. Or you could go out there and have somebody stay with the dog. Obviously, there's more than one way to do this, but just make sure that you're out to the front, right? So the beauty of the launcher, like it's really introducing gun noise. It's keeping the dogs being reinforced with steadiness because now we've got noise and we got to retrieve and we still have to be steady. This sounds real similar to a duck blind, right? So those are kind of like the peripheral benefits, like the introduction to noise and associating it with a retrieve. But once the puppy is comfortable with that, I'm going to start progressively making the retrieves more difficult. And the beauty of the launcher, so if if you only ever throw retrieves for your dog, like you go out with a handful of bumpers and you start chucking them, or tennis balls or whatever, you have limitations. Like I don't care who you are. Like if you're Randy Johnson or whoever, like you still can only throw it so far, right? Like especially a tennis ball because they're so light, they just don't go very far. And if that's all your dog ever gets, it will start to like become conditioned to that. Like I've seen so many dogs that I could tell you exactly how far the owner can throw
Yeah.
because that's how far they go. And then they start hunting right there. And if the
Yeah.
retrieve is 10 yards farther than that, it doesn't even cross their mind the retrieve might be out there because it never is. That's nothing can go that far, right? So the launcher gives me the ability to really start to stretch the retrieves out. But more than that, it allows me to create different angles and different complexities. So angles, when we start out, we shoot really low. So it's bouncing along the ground, it's exciting, and it's easy for the dog. Later on, we're going to go to a 45-degree angle, which I think is about the most efficient trajectory, or it's going to give you the most carry. So at a 45, like now we're really stretching that retrieve out. But you'll see some dogs will be like, well, I know how far that launcher can go. And they start to time it as well, I think. So you hear the blast and they watch and they can hear when it hits the ground as well, typically. And I think they'll figure out like, okay, there's like 3 seconds of hang time. So that thing must be 70 yards away, right? I don't know that they're actually like realizing they're doing this, but you'll see where they start to like how far they go starts to become dependent on how long that dummy is in the air.
They start
So I'll
creating those
switch.
expectations almost, just like, oh, it should be right around in here. I pulled out the
Yes.
calculator. This is where it should have landed.
Yes, and this is probably only cockers are smart enough to do that, but but I swear it's something like that. So I'll switch it up on them, and I'll launch it really high, like not straight up, but it goes way up there. There's tons of hang time, and 5 seconds later, however, I don't think it's 5 seconds, but it feels like 5 seconds later, the dummy hits, and it's only 30 yards in front of me, but there was so much hang time, you would swear that it must be 100 yards away, right? And you'd be amazed how many dogs you do that for them, and they head out there like headed for the 100-yard mark, and they just fly past where it actually came down, right? Which is fine because this is training. I'm not going to get upset about that. It's more like, huh, look at that. I did create a problem. The dog is starting to time it, right? So by changing that trajectory, I can force the dog to work more on like actually marking where that retrieve came down more than just timing it and saying, well, that was in the air for a long time. It must be a long ways out there. So I can change the trajectory in the air to make it more complex or less complex for them. And then I can also start creating angles. So like if you think about when you're upland hunting, like let's say a pheasant gets up right on the nose of the dog and it flies, but as it flies, it sees something or it realizes it's not going the direction it wants to go and it hooks, right? Like how many times we see that happen all the time with pheasants.
Yeah.
Not so much with grouse because there's woods, right? But with pheasants, you definitely see that. Like they don't fly in a straight line all the time. Sometimes they do, but not all the time.
Right.
So if that dog just watches that pheasant go straight and you send it for the retrieve and it just takes that straight line. Well, if the pheasant hooked to the side, we're not gonna make that retrieve, right? So I can't make this dummy hook so much. Like I guess if you go out on a really windy day and you use a canvas dummy, and you shoot across the wind, it's gonna bend it a little bit. But it's a lot easier for me to just walk to the side of the dog. So let's say I go 20 yards to the side and I shoot at a weird angle. Maybe I shoot at like 10 o'clock. So now the dog kind of has like a crossing retrieve. The dog isn't going to be able to just follow the line of the dummy and go in that line. It's going to have to take its own line and intersect with the line that dummy took. And it's going to force the dog to be a better marker instead of just running in a straight line. So I can do that, and then I can make the retrieves longer by going out farther in front of the dog. So I might, sometimes I might be 40 yards out in front of the dog, and I'm shooting the launcher away from the dog. So maybe we're getting a well over 100-yard retrieve, and I like those because the dog's kind of out there on his own. I launch it. The dog has to run past me and then keep going for another 70 or 80 yards. That's good for problem solving. It's it builds confidence to have the dog just go right on by me like I don't exist and go out there and make the reach. And then I may flip that around sometimes and have the dog sitting 20 yards in front of me and then launch the dummy over top of the dog. So now the dog has to turn, watch it come on the other side. So it's looking directly away from me. Still has to be steady. So that's good for steadiness training. It's good for confidence because no human in the sight picture. I'm just kind of out here on my own. There's the retrieve. Boom, I get sent for it. I go and make the retrieve. The big thing is I think these launchers get a little bit of a bad rep because people just go out, they stand next to the dog and they launch a retrieve 50 yards.
Yeah.
And the dog goes out and makes the retrieve and they're like, okay, like big whoop, right?
That's all that they think that's all it can do is just that one
correct.
retrieve over and over again. And it's like, no, you're failing to recognize that you have the capability of making this look however you want. You may not be able to put any English on it and do a curveball, so to speak, but just by you repositioning where you're at and you getting away from your dog and creating that distance, you can, to your point, train a lot of different elements that we value within these gun dogs.
Yep, exactly. Like, I don't have like any like one way that I do it necessarily. I go out, got the launcher, I got a pocket full of dummies, and we just like start trying to create retrieves that we think the dog can make, but that are going to challenge the dog. So
yeah,
transitions, like launching a dummy over a creek, or the best example, one of my original cockers, Rocky was his name. That dog was a phenomenal retriever. And I started doing dummy. I say we, but my daughter was like little, so she wasn't out there at the time. But that dog, probably at 6 months old, I started doing dummy launcher work with it. And by the time it was like 10 months old, there was a lake close to my house, and there was a little island that was about 65 or 70 yards out. And there was a few trees that were on it and some heavy green grass. And I'd go down there. This dog was like 10 months old. I'd go down there with one of the PVC torpedo dummies. And I figured out if I launched it at like just the right angle, I could land it on that island, like 10 yards up into the grass.
Yeah.
And I mean, that dog, it was awesome. Like I would show him off to people. I'd come down here and watch this, and you launch the dummy out there. And like it's like a $25 dummy, and if he doesn't find it, it ain't coming back. And I don't have another dog.
I'm not going to get it
to send out there. It was totally like, yeah, I'm not that cocky anymore, probably. But man, that dog figured. I mean, he'd swim all the way out there. He'd climb up on the shore. He'd go up in the grass and look around and find it and bring it back. And I mean, later on in life, that dog made some incredible retrieves on wild game because he learned how to be a problem solver with the dummy launcher, because I was always giving him something different, launching it over trees. Like I don't have many trees at the place that I have now. It's mostly just farm field around me. So I might use the house and stand on one side of the house and launch a dummy over the house. And the dog has to figure out how to go around the house and then locate the dummy, which that's a challenge. Or use the barn, or I use my driveway. I might use vehicles just to create obstacles that the dog has to go through. I'm kind of just gonna throw out some random little tricks maybe that I do. One thing that I'll do is I'll have the dog. This is with an older dog, so don't go out there with a 10-month-old puppy and let's see if it'll do this. We always work up to things because progress is always faster if we're working from a place of winning. So if we lose, meaning we fail the retrieve in this case, there's not much learning that happens from losing, from failure. There's a lot more learning that happens from success. So we always start out with something we think the dog can do, and then we make it progressively harder. So we hopefully just keep winning as we go, but at the end we're doing things that are much more complex. But one of the things that I'll do with a dog that's more advanced, I'll take them out in the field and I'll find like a really heavy clump of switchgrass or maybe a big bush or something like that that's really going to obstruct the dog's vision. And I'll have that dog sit like right up against that obstacle. So all it can see is like up at like I don't even know what angle it would be, but like it can't see very far forward at all. It can mostly only see upwards, right? And I'll go out in front of it and I'll launch the dummy in such a way that I know the dog can see like the very initial like launch of that dummy, but after that it can't see it at all. So it turns it into a complete blind fall. The dog has no idea how far it went, other than it might use its ears to try to listen. So it's up against that bush. We'll say it's a bush. I launch it, I send it. Now that dog has to be an incredible problem solver. It's not just marking a spot. He just knows the general direction and he has to go out and find it. Amy. I found for field trials that was really helpful because sometimes you're trialing a really heavy cover, you're trialing in the woods, and the dog doesn't always see the bird at all, or sometimes it just sees it a little bit. So it's good that they're listening like for the fall of that bird. As humans, like we think only of the visual aspect, like if they can see it or if they can't see it, but dogs have really good hearing, especially if we haven't blown it out with a dummy launcher. So they're listening just as much as they're looking. And most of the time, if you pay attention as a human, like you can hear when the bird hits the ground. There's a thump, especially if the bird has got any kind of altitude, right? And dogs can definitely mark off of sound, like where it hit. So they're up against that bush. I launch the dummy. They're sitting there waiting. Thump, you might hear it fall. We're going to send them for the retrieve. It's a really difficult retrieve for them, obviously, like depending on where the dummy fell. But it's good for problem solving. They can't just go to a spot. They've got to go figure out. And what you'll see is the good dogs, and maybe even like not the good dogs, but any dog with experience will learn to start to hold an area better and also how to use the wind better. So you'll see with the good dogs, what they'll do, they go to where they think the dummy should be. And if the dummy's there, they pick it up and they bring it back and it looks great. If it's not there, you'll see them start to make circles. And I like to see them making circles that takes the wind into account. So if it was a downwind launch, I want that dog to go to where it thought the bird was and then start taking circles or hooks downwind of that spot. So it's going to finally get downwind of where the dummy is and find it. If it was into the wind, the dog goes to the spot where it's at, where it thinks the dummy should be. Usually you'll see that dog start to make circles, but they start coming in closer to you because they're trying to get that wind in their favor, right? And then if it's not there, then they'll take a bigger bite. But the more you do this, the more you'll see them start to be really logical about how they search. So they go to their spot they think it should be. They make a circle from there. They might work back closer to you. They don't find it. Okay, I'm going to go take a bigger cast and start working away because it wasn't closer. To me, that's really cool to see, like the dog out there being independent and using like almost like process of elimination to figure out where that dummy is. Other dogs are really going to struggle with that, where they just kind of lose their mind and like, it's not here. I don't know what to do. And they just start running or they come back.
Well, not just dogs lose their mind, but handlers as well. How many times have we been in the field with a handler to where it's just like, if you can't direct that dog exactly where it's on and there's no hunt 'em up command or anything like that, the handlers are sitting there. You can just see them get uneasy. I mean, it's just their tension is building and they don't know what to do because they have zero control over that situation.
Yeah, that's true. So my rule of thumb with these are, somebody told me this a long time ago, like let your marks be marks and let your blinds be blinds. So meaning if this is a mark, meaning the dog saw it, then let the dog figure it out. I don't want to get involved and start directing and handling that dog, except on rare occasions. But for the most part, if you saw it, you go find it. I shouldn't have to help you because we both saw it. This one's
out there. Go get it. Yeah,
that's right. If we start handling them on those, we end up with the dog that's really dependent on us. Like they'll go out and they'll look for a little bit. Hey, can't find it, boss. Can you let me know where it's at? And I
Yeah.
don't I don't want that because sometimes, if I'm using the dummy launcher, I probably know where it's at, or at least the general area. But
But if
what
you're
if
hunting, you don't know.
I don't always know, that's for sure. Like maybe I had an obstruction and couldn't see where the bird came down, or
Yeah.
so, or maybe I'm not in a position to handle that dog anyway because I can't see the dog because the cover's too tall. So if I've got a dog that has no confidence in its marking and it thinks it needs to be helped on everything, I'm eventually going to run into problems.
Yeah.
When I used to trial, like that was a big deal. Like you didn't want to get involved handling dogs that should be making a mark because that really it doesn't look good, right? But aside from trials, like just from hunting, like I don't want a dog that just gives up and comes and asks for help. And we condition them to ask for help if we offer help,
Yeah.
especially if we offer it too frequently. So
And
let your
and
let your
on the
marks be sorry.
on the pointing dog side of things, you literally just described all the benefits or the pros as to why we do the duck search at the utility level in NAVDA, right? Is you want that dog that can, just because you shoot a gun and you send it, you're saying, hey, there's game out there, go find it independently without me. And it's important to develop that nose to where you're not always going to be able to put the dog on a dime. And then say you cripple that duck and it lands out there wherever, you may have sent them exactly where that duck landed, but if it dove on you, you have no idea. And then how many times are you hunting in cattail sloughs? How many times are you hunting in flooded timber to where the dog can't even see you to get a handle? So it is
Yeah,
important to still develop both. You want a dog that can handle to at least a certain degree, but you also need that dog to be able to use its nose because we don't have that nose. That's why we have the dog.
that's right. So if I'm letting my marks be marks, that doesn't mean I don't do blind retrieves. I just make them independent of each
Right.
other. So
Makes
so
sense.
this session we're working on blinds. You didn't see the bird, you just got to trust me. But this session we're working on marks. You did see the bird, you got to go figure it out on your own. And then down the road, like if we're out on a mark in a trial or while we're hunting and the dog needs help, well, it knows how to take help because we did that on with blinds, right? So it's not like it can't do that. It's just not going to be out there expecting it, if that makes
Yeah.
sense. And I'll also do other stuff. Like I don't ever want a dog to become so independent that it just doesn't hear me or it's not completely doing its own thing. So I might do there's two things I'll do. One, I might give them a fairly easy retrieve with a launcher, send them, and then stop them when they're like 20 yards away. And I'm not going to handle them from there. I'm just stopping them to make sure that they're still listening to me. So a toot on the whistle, they put their butt down. I might call them back into me, send them again and let them go make the retrieve, or I might just cast them off from where they're at. I'm not handling them. I'm just making sure they're working with me. The other thing that I will do is if I have multiple dogs, which obviously not everybody can do this, but I like to go out not with young dogs, like they get introduced independently, but with older dogs that know the drill and they're really comfortable with the dummy launcher and they're good at it. I might take back in the day when I had more dogs, I might take 7 or 8 dogs out there and have them all sitting there, launch a retrieve, send a dog. And if it doesn't nail the retrieve, like if it screws it up in any way, I just call it back in. Two, two, two. It comes back in. I send the next dog.
Yep.
If it fails to retrieve, call it back in. I don't give them much time. Just go out there, give me your best shot. Nope, that wasn't it. You come back in. Then we send the next dog. And I've had a couple. Cato is the best I ever had. Like he could sit there and watch 5 dogs fail like an almost impossible retrieve that was like over cottonwoods, over a creek, over a berm, through like 10 different transitions, right? Like
Right.
if I had to go find it, there's no way I'm gonna find it because he was just like gone into the abyss of all this nasty cover, right? And he could sit there and watch 5 dogs fail that retrieve and then just Cato and out, and here he comes back like 30 seconds later. Right. So some of them are really, really good at that. But what I found is I'm accomplishing two things. Like if they go out and screw up and I call them in, one, I'm proving to myself and to them that they'll listen to me while they're on a retrieve, right? But then dogs are competitive as well. And I know that, like, for my dogs in particular, they don't like to share work. And if I get them sent on a retrieve, if I send them on a retrieve and they fail and I call them back in and then another dog goes and makes that retrieve, I might probably because I'm a bit of a jerk, but the dog that makes the retrieve, I might give them a little extra praise and like make just a little bit more of a deal
Yep.
about it than I should, just to just kind of spite the dog that failed. Uh, Only because I love them and I want them to do better, though, right? Like the next
Yeah.
time, like, hey, quit screwing around, like
I'm glad I'm not
focus.
the only one to do it, because I do that with my own dogs, and I'm like you. I'm like, this might be a an a-hole move here in front of them, but
Yeah,
I think the same exact thing. And I'm not super retriever heavy on what I do, but
yeah,
with the versatile dogs I do some retrieves. But to your point, they're so competitive that this is another trick that I'm using with my current puppy, the English setter pup that we've talked about, to just get her retrieve drive outside, because inside she has
yeah.
all the retrieve drive you could want. She just brings me stuff all day long. Then you go
Okay.
outside, she crosses that threshold, and she has one thing on her brain, and that's to go find birds. I mean, it's
Yeah,
what she's bred to do. Well, to get her to actually do a retrieve, I use the other dogs pretty much exactly how you just described it. And then guess who cares about a retrieve all of a sudden? She does.
yeah,
And then
yep.
same thing, Lucy and Rachel, they have this little competitive streak to where if one fails on a retrieve, I send the other, and you can see in their eyes for the
Burns
one
them.
that failed. Oh man, it's like they drive even harder on the next rep. They're like, I'm getting it on the next one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I will say, like, I'm not such a jerk that like I let another dog. The Brits would call it eye wiping. Have you heard that expression?
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah, so it's like in field trials over there. It's like it's part of their verbiage or description. But an eye wipe is when you go out on a retrieve, you fail the retrieve, and then the judge on the other side of the course might bring the other dog over and send that dog out. And if it goes out and makes the retrieve, then the dog that failed the retrieve is out of the trial. I think
Mm.
if it fails, we don't do that in U.S. trials, but over there, the eye wipe is a really common thing. Um, I'm not such a jerk that like we do an eye wipe and then the other dog doesn't get a chance to do it right. Like I don't just kick them out and say you're done.
Yep.
Like I'm gonna give them that. I might give them the exact same retrieve so that they can go out and prove that they can do it. It also gets easier the second time because the first dog laid a scent trail out to it back. I get that, but I don't care. I just want them. I want them to be successful.
Yeah.
At the end of the day. But we build that up, and then you give them an outlet. So we might take away that retrieve by letting another dog do it. But I'm gonna give them a chance to do it the right way. And at the end of the day, I never end a session with a failed retrieve, and I try to never end the session with struggling on a retrieve. Like,
Uh,
like let's say I send a dog out on a really big retrieve and it misses the mark and it has to hunt and hunt and hunt and hunt and it finally makes that retrieve and brings it back. I don't want that to be my last one because I don't think that's a good one to like go to bed on. Like I don't think
yeah.
that's the one I want them thinking about while they're in their in their run or in the house or wherever. So
I want you to elaborate a little on that, because I would say a challenge for a lot of people, myself included. I get myself into this pickle all the time. The greedy trainer, right? They nail it. You don't quit when you should quit, and then all of a sudden you're not hitting it afterwards. So what happens if you paint yourself into that corner to where I need to end on this good note? They did it right, but because I'm greedy, I went for another rep. They fail or they're
yeah,
struggling, and then you're in this never-ending circle of the dog struggling and not getting that success, and you can't find your way out of the scenario. How, can you talk to that a little bit?
yeah, you can always make an easier retrieve. Like you can always go back to a like I do this I do this all the time actually. Maybe I'm out there with the PVC dummy and I'm launching absolute bombs. Um, I don't know what the kids call like home runs these days, but like just dingers, right? Like,
Yeah,
man,
dongs,
that thing
yeah.
went, it's gone. And maybe we have a tough session because it was just a little too much for that dog. I might put a canvas dummy on at the end, and I might shoot it 5 feet off the ground. So it hits the ground and bounces, which we should go back to that, but it bounces a couple times and like leaves a scent trail and it's right there, and the dog can just go out and nail it and bring it back. And like that's good enough. Let's end right there. We struggle a little bit on the big ones. Maybe we pushed a little bit too hard, but I don't want to take their confidence away and then put them away on that. Like that's not mentally, that's not a good thing for a dog. Like I want a dog that's like, yeah, I can do this and I'm good at this. And like, I want them excited about it. And like failure doesn't build confidence. Failure typically doesn't really build excitement. Like failure just kind of sucks, frankly, right? But
Yeah.
sometimes we need it. We got to toe that line to make things harder. But we don't want to stay on that line all the time because you're going to erode confidence. So
You still
maybe
want
we
to
have a
set
tough
them up for
session.
success.
Totally. So let's give them, and they don't necessarily, dogs aren't rocket scientists. Like if I give them a low trajectory on pretty light cover, they don't know that I just like gave them a freebie. Like they just think I launched another retrieve and they nailed that one. And that was awesome, right? But it's not like oh, you're taking it. Like as a human, like it's like playing ping pong with my kids. They're obsessed with this right now. The boys are, and they think they're so like they think they're great at it. Like little like they didn't realize this, but their dad used to not have a life and played an awful lot of ping pong in the day,
Yeah.
and was quite good at ping pong, like won tournaments and everything. And they play with me, and they're like, they think they're I don't they've never beat me, and they may never beat me, and I'm not gonna let them beat me. But I may take it easier on them,
You let them
right?
get
Like
close. Yeah. Taste it just a
yeah,
little bit.
well, not even too close. They'll let us score some points. But like the one, so I'm left-handed, and the one, my older boy, I was playing him right-handed. I was still kicking his butt, but he didn't know. And
Uh,
they've watched the movie Princess Bride, so I'm like, do you know why I'm smiling like this? He's like, what? And then like he thinks about it, and he's like, oh, you're playing with your right hand, Dad. And like to him, that made him mad at me, right? Because
but it
like
also fueled the
he
fire too, I bet.
kind of, but he thought he was doing better, and then it turned out he wasn't doing better. I had just handicapped myself, right?
Right.
And I was like, well, fine, like, well, force me to play left-handed. Right now, there's no reason to play left-handed because you can't even beat me right-handed, right?
Yeah.
That's what I told him. So for a kid, that can be frustrating. Like he was frustrated at me. If I go out and like give the dog an easy retrieve, they're not like, oh, like he's just babying me right now, or he's like demeaning me. They don't
Unless
think that at all.
unless they're cockers, right? Because we already established earlier they can do,
Well, that's true. That's true.
calculus and physics and all that stuff, right?
That's yeah, but they're still a sucker for an easy retrieve. So
The chasing the rabbit, bouncing all over the place is gonna exceed
yeah,
the mathematical skills in that scenario.
yeah, exactly. So okay, so let me jump back on that one a little bit. So
Yeah.
the one thing when like if I throw a dummy, it lands and maybe it bounces one bounce, like and it's like 2 feet from where it hit the ground, right? But it's not enough separation to factor into the retrieve at all. So the dog, if it finds where the dummy fell, it's also going to smell the dummy typically. If I take a canvas dummy and I launch it into a low cover, like maybe a cut hayfield, so there's like just enough cover that when it comes to a rest, you can't see it, but not enough cover to really slow it down. It's going to bounce for a little ways and then it's going to stop. When the dog gets to the fall, it's going to smell like you'll see this. The dog will get right to where the dummy hit the ground, and they're like, "Well, where's the dummy? It's supposed to be right here. I can smell
Yeah.
it." And especially with young dogs, that can be really confusing. And they'll hold that area and just keep looking like this. I smell it here. I smell it here. I smell it here. Eventually, most of them will figure out like, well, it's not here. I better look somewhere else. Um, if I take this PVC launch or dummy out there, this thing will. If I launch this onto low ground, like that first bounce is going to carry like 15 yards probably, and then it's going to hit and keep bouncing and bouncing and bouncing. That's a super great skill for a dog to learn. Like just because I found where the bird hit the ground doesn't mean that the bird is here. It might have left the area. Where is the scent taking me to? Right. So I'd like to do stuff like that. Not all the time, right? Like it's always about variety. But one of the things I will do is launch a dummy low so that I intentionally get that bounce in cover. So the dog has to sort out like, well, here's smell, but there's no dummy. Where could it be? Sometimes that bounce is so big that there's not a scent trail for the dog to follow. That doesn't really bother me. Like, okay, be smart. Start making casts and figure out where it went to, but don't just give up on it and don't just hold that area. Just because you smell it doesn't mean it's necessarily there, right? So I think that's a good skill for them to learn. It's another way that I
Yeah.
use them.
And
The other thing I would,
I've seen
oh,
crippled pheasants do that. You know,
yeah,
crippled. I mean,
definitely.
heck, even on the NAVDA pheasant track at the puppy level, the NA test, they'll pull the flight feathers on one wing and then, you know, simulate a winged pheasant, and all of a sudden it'll jump 10, 15 yards off, kind of halfway glide off a little bit, and then keep going. That's just the best way to simulate that kind of scenario
Yep.
almost.
Yep. And end of the day, I just want a problem solver. Like when you go out on a mark, figure it out. Like whatever you got to do, figure it out. Don't come back to me until you have that bird, right? Or until I
Yeah.
call you. Um, but we do that by like making it progressively more complex. The one thing I'm going to throw out there is you do have to be a little bit careful. Like if I have a dog that maybe is too sticky, it hunts too closely, and I want it to start opening up, I'm probably going to give it more and more dummy launcher work because it will open up a dog. But like by opening it up, I mean it will get it to run bigger because they're getting more independence. Like they're out there searching on their own. They're learning to use the wind. They're finding the dummy. Like it's a big confidence booster to them. And they're doing it without me, which is great for a dog that needs to be opened up. But if you have a dog that's already like on the edge and you have some control issues, the dummy launcher, like you might want to be smart about how you use it because it might create more issues. So if you've got a dog that maybe you got some control issues with, doesn't mean don't use the dummy launcher, but you probably need to be doing more control type drills, like more in close games, to
Mhm.
offset like what you're doing with the launcher, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it 100% does. And it sounds like you've pretty much hit on all the, I guess, cons or errors that I could come up with kind of just throughout all your examples, the main of which being, you know, what you just said, knowing your dog, is it going to open it up or close them down? You know, you take that, but then also the main one that you've repeated a number of times is mix it up, make it a variety. Don't do the same thing over and over and over again, because it doesn't matter if you're throwing it or you're shooting it. If you do the same exact route over and over again, that's your dog's just going to get used to going in one direction. And I think that's
Yep.
where this, along with many other tools, even bird launchers included, most people just kind of get pigeonholed into one use for them. They don't use their imagination, or they don't really consider what the dog is interpreting. And then they just do a million reps over and over and over again. And then they wonder why their dog doesn't want to swim past 15 yards to pick up a bumper.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And just be smart. Like if the dog can't do it, don't do it. Work up to it. Go to an open field. Like the other day, I have a 2-year-old Springer here right now, and he had not had a dummy launcher before. I'm doing a little bit of work with him for a friend, and I think I gave him one retrieve into cover, and he like completely screwed it up. So I went to the other side of the property where I just planted switchgrass in there, but it hasn't even germinated yet because we're in a drought, and so it's just bare dirt. And I use the wind to my advantage. So that's the other thing to take into consideration. If it's windy out and you launch directly into the wind, it's not going to go as far. And if you turn and launch it downwind, it's going to go a long way. So for that dog, I took him out to this dirt field. I put the wind at my back and I shot it at a 45-degree angle. And I gave him some bombs out there, but he could see them. And I used like a brand new white canvas bumper so he could see it out there. And
Mm.
you know, he's going 100 or 120 yards out there nailing it and coming back, and he thinks he's all it because he's doing well. Obviously, I made it super easy for him, even though he had to run a long ways. Then when we went back to the cover, I didn't give him retrieves that were that far, but I gave him decent retrieves. And because I had conditioned him to go farther on retrieves and to like learn to run for a while before getting to the dummy, when I went back into cover and did that, like he had way more confidence and he could make the longer retrieves more easily. If I had just stayed there and kept launching hard retrieves into the cover, eventually we probably would have got there, but it was much faster to just take a step back, go to a dirt field, go to a brand new white bumper, and like just make it easy, stretch your legs, find it, and now we'll go back to the heavy cover.
Yeah. No, I mean, makes a whole lot of sense. It's, I mean, in the truest sense, all the way back to the start of this, it's kind of like a redirect. It's not a redirect, but like we're redirecting how we're getting the dog to learn this ourselves, right? The setup matters and stuff like this,
A
to
lot.
where, you know, it's just use your imagination. That's all that matters, is like, just if you're bored with it, the dog's going to get bored with it, and then the confidence is going to suffer. And like you said, you might eventually, anything with high reps, eventually maybe the dog figures it out. But why take 100 of them when you can probably do it in a handful of them?
Yeah. Step back, get some momentum, and hit it with momentum. It's easier.
Yeah. So where do the remote launchers fall in? So far you've been describing
Yeah.
everything that you're shooting close to you. Is the remote launcher just a way to extend them even further if necessary, or are you just trying to establish that degree of separation between you and gunfire, maybe?
So right now, both of my Thunder launchers are non-functional. So we're not doing any of that, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
There's maybe a little bit of a history here. But when I did use those things, so for me personally, I use them almost to just condition the dog more. So like if I was getting ready for a national, say, I might put those. I have two 5-shooters, and I might put them like 120 yards out in a pasture and just put up on top of a mound with the dog. Launch one, send the dog. It runs out, comes back, send another one. So we get 10 retrieves, and it's 125 yards out there for every single retrieve. And like,
Yeah.
that's a great way to like just build endurance and like, muscle the dog up a little bit. So I'd use them that way. For a younger, like they have way more application than that, obviously. And there's going to be people that could speak to them much better than I could. But other ways that I would use them might be for a younger dog. So the nice thing about them is they have the electronics on them. So the quack, 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 or the beep, beep. I just use the quack, quack. The dog starts to learn to look away for a retrieve. So not everything's coming from me or from my hands. Now something's originating out in the field. So the dog's learning to look away. So that's a good thing. The other thing is for those launchers, like, yes, you can make the retrieves ridiculously long if you want. I don't really have a use for that since I have upland dogs. If I was training for like maybe the master level for retrievers, or certainly for trials, like more distance is necessary. Obviously, for my application, not necessary. But you can build confidence really easily. So because it's so repetitive, like I can launch one dummy, I send the dog for it, it finds it eventually, or maybe it doesn't find it and it comes back, and I can launch the same retrieve, send the dog again. The repetitiveness, you can use it to your advantage in some instances, right? As the dog gets better at it, like it works against me to be repetitive. But at the start, when I'm trying to build confidence, that repetitiveness is actually helpful. Like, let's just keep doing the same retrieve over and over again until you get good at it. And then we can introduce a different angle. The other thing that those remote launchers can do is create angles that are like impossible to create with a handheld launcher. So
Yeah.
maybe we have the launcher 150 yards out, and it's actually launching the dummy straight toward the dog, and it's still dropping 100 yards away. But that's a weird angle, right? When everything is going away, and then all of a sudden this is coming at you. That'll screw with your depth perception for sure. So you can definitely create different angles with those remote launchers. I find that even when my remote launchers are working, I still use the handheld launcher probably 95% of the time, because it's easy. Like the remote launchers, you got to set them up, and you got to make sure your electronics are charged up. And if you're using the Thunder launchers, you got to have your MAP gas with you, and like it's kind of a pain in the butt, to be honest. And like for my style of training, more like run and gun, the handheld launcher is awesome because I can just grab the launcher, grab a few blanks, throw them in my pocket, make sure I've got my earplugs, make sure I do always wear safety glasses as well. I got a whistle around my neck, and we can go out and go for a walk and just start creating difficult retrieves or whatever complexity of retrieve we want. So they do definitely both have their place. For an upland dog, the handheld launcher is a great tool.
Yeah. No, makes too much sense, man. We've kind of covered it all, from tips or suggestions on your end on how to.
I've got one more.
I was about to say, what are we missing?
This is the life changer right here.
Okay.
So these things are a pain in the butt. I'm going to use the video portion here again. You crack this thing after you fire off a shot. I think and maybe it's because I buy these cheap blanks at the hardware store, but all that pressure causes the brass to expand, and those things get stuck. The spent shells get stuck inside of there, and
Yeah.
it's got like a little ejector on there that pops it up a little bit. But like I mangle fingernails trying to pry those things out of there. Complete, like it's unbelievably frustrating sometimes. So if I have my whistle around my neck, which I make sure I always do, one, because if I need to call the dog in, I want to have the whistle. But honestly, like more importantly, I grab that whistle and the little ring that's on the whistle, I just hook that on the cement shell and I pop it out with that.
I
And,
gotcha.
it's the dumbest thing, but I'm telling you, like it's the handiest thing. So make sure you
Yeah.
have your whistle so you can get the spent cartridges out.
Yep. No, I've run into that issue. I haven't used too many dummy launchers, but they show up on occasion, and we use them. And yeah, they're always getting jammed up. I think I've always just taken my pocket knife out and just kind of pry it
Yeah.
open. But
And that's a
yeah,
pain because
it
the
is.
whistle's just right there.
Yeah, well, just pop it out. That's a good tip. I'll be sure to use that one. But so we've gone all covered a lot of tips. We've covered a lot of what not to do or common errors that we've observed. Is there anything else that we are missing on this conversation? Because to your point, like it's a valuable tool. As I just said, I don't use it very often. So I know that other people, especially DIY trainers, probably aren't using these tools nearly enough, or at least to the extent that they could be using them.
Yeah. I'm trying to think like a lot of things if you came and spend a day with me, which maybe that'll happen this fall,
Yeah.
you'd probably be like, oh yeah, talk about this one thing you did. Like, I didn't even know that I was doing that, but I guess you're right. I do that every time. So I'm trying to rack my brain right now. Like, is there any like glaring thing that I'm missing? We already talked about it, but I do make sure I don't ever hold that launcher like right by the dog's head. I'll at least
Yeah.
step in front. Even with an older dog, I'll step in front by 6 or 7 feet because I don't gain anything by having it close to their head. And I mean, dogs do go deaf. Like it doesn't always happen, but they do go deaf. So, and we do have science that tells us why deafness happens for many reasons, but loud noises can definitely expedite that.
Oh
So
yeah.
if I can avoid that, so I'm always out in front of the dog or off to the side of it. The one other thing that this is starting to sound like an infomercial for launchers. I wish I was getting royalties off them, but I will often just use them as a starter pistol as well. So I mean, I have an alpha starter pistol. It's obviously pretty sweet, but I don't use it that often. And when I need it, like I don't have it on me, and half the time I can't find it or whatever. So I will often use my handheld launcher as a starter pistol, especially if I only need one shot. It's really loud. If you just put a blank in here and shoot it without a dummy on it, it's still really really loud. So if I want to work on like sitting to the shot, I might go out in the field with a dummy, walk the dog, fire a shot off with the launcher. When the dog sits, throw a retrieve for it, something like that. So if you are trying to justify buying one of these things and you're not sure the retrieving is enough, like if you don't have a starter pistol, like it definitely can double as one.
Yeah. No, I mean, too easy. So,
Yeah.
you talked about the introduction at the very start of this. Would you say that this is a strong enough tool to do gun introduction with a dog? Maybe somebody doesn't have access to birds or something later on to do it, how we all talk about associated birds.
Yeah.
Would you say that this is loud enough, associating enough to birds or chasing or something like that to be a proper gun intro for the average dog?
Okay, so I would say it definitely isn't going to hurt if you do it right. Like I think for most dogs, like this is probably sufficient. Um, for people, for somebody who hasn't read a lot of dogs or owned a lot of dogs, you're always going to be better off playing it safe. So
Yeah.
I do not want somebody being like, well, Jordan said on that podcast that because I could use a dummy launcher and now all of a sudden I'm responsible for a gun shy dog. Like I definitely don't want that. But I do think if you introduce them to the launcher the correct way, like how I described, if you go back and proof it with gunfire, so I'm sure you've covered that in a lot of different episodes because it's something that a lot of people care about. But
Yeah.
personally, how I would introduce gunfire is I would have me and my dog with some birds like maybe some dead birds from a training day or something like that, and I'm 100 yards away, and I've got somebody firing the shot. I throw a retrieve, and while the bird is in the air, actually at the start, I throw a bird, I send the dog for it, and when the dog is almost to the bird, I have somebody fire a shot like 100 yards away. And ideally, that dog, all it can see and smell and think about is that bird, and the shot in the background is like completely inconsequential, right? And then we just build up from there to, hopefully, if things are going well, within a few shots, we throw the bird, we fire a shot while the bird's in the air, and then we send the dog for it, and the gun progressively works closer to the dog, and with no concern from the dog. I would still go through that, especially like if I wasn't completely comfortable with my dog. I would still go through that process. I do think the launcher is like going to make that process a lot faster for pretty much every dog. It should make it a lot easier because it's already learned to associate noise with a reward. The more we talk about this, more I think, I should say there are certain dogs, like if your dog doesn't have really high retrieve drive and it's kind of a skittish dog, which I feel like we probably see more skittish dogs now than we used to. The same by we, I mean like just in
Just in
general, the
general.
industry as a
Yeah.
and I think there's probably a lot of reasons for that. I think our culture drives it. I think genetics drive it a little bit. I think our culture really drives that. If I
100%.
have a dog, if I have a dog that has low retrieve drive and it's a little bit skittish, I'm going to be really, really careful with the launcher, how I introduce it. Because even if I go out there 20 yards in front of it and if the dog doesn't really love to retrieve, it might just decide that it doesn't like the loud noise and the retrieve isn't enough to like help it overcome that. So you do want to be smart about that. I think that's like a whole nother conversation. And a dog like that is definitely a challenge and probably not going to solve that issue here. There are little things you can do, like you might go out and I don't really ever do it, although I have in the past, use the green blanks. The green blanks aren't nearly as loud. The dummy might only go 20 feet in front of you, but hopefully there's a little bit of a noise. Poop, and there's the dummy right in front of you. Maybe that's the bridge that you need in order to work up to a yellow blank. You also could make sure that the wind is at your back. So when you shoot it, the wind is carrying the noise away from the dog instead of blowing it right into the dog. So you could kind of muffle it a little bit. So just like, I mean, these podcasts, I don't care who you bring on here, like how good they are. And some of them are great, obviously. You're not going to solve every issue for every dog.
No.
Having conversations like this, all we can do is like throw ideas out there and like give listeners something to think about, and hopefully there's a few things with enough meat on them for that particular dog. Like you hope that everybody's like, hey, yeah, that's not going to work for my dog. That's not going to work. But that one thing right there, like, yeah, that described my dog perfectly, and I'm going to go try something, right? And so if anybody out there is listening is like, man, my dog is really skittish, I'm going to go launch a dummy for it. Like, don't do that. Like, be smarter than that. Just because we talked about it on the podcast doesn't mean it's for every dog.
Exactly, man.
Be a dog trainer at the end of the day.
Exactly. That's the disclaimer that we're going to end on, because at the end of the day, we can sit here and talk about this. This is very general speaking, talking about the average dog with the average handler, but it's up to you as the handler to know your dog, know your capabilities, and just be smart about it. It's be the advocate for your dog, and don't put it in a situation where it could potentially fail. But Jordan, man,
Yeah, 100%.
this was a lot of fun. It's always fun catching up with you and talking dogs. I know that we'll circle back and do another topic here soon. And just like you said, maybe we'll have to link up in person this fall at some point.
Yeah, both those ideas sound great for me.
Yeah. All right, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jordan Horak, kind of breaking down everything and all the tips and tricks and just thought processes on dummy launchers in general. This episode was presented by Standing Sun Supply, DT Systems, Onyx Hunt, Final Rise, as well as Upland Gun Company. It just goes to show that, that this is a tool that you see in a lot of people's tool belt, so to speak, or bucket. And, you don't see a whole lot of people that, diversify or provide a lot of variety with how they use this tool. And it's just a good example of something to where a lot of people might get with the anticipation of using it just one certain way, or maybe they're only familiar with one certain way. But it just goes to show that once you kind of understand it and you get creative and you kind of really break out and you start applying different drills or setups, how a tool such as the dummy launcher can really help you guys take the next step with your dog, and at the very least just add a little bit of variety, a little bit of fun to the training, and you're not just doing the same thing over and over again, which a lot of people just kind of fall in that trap of just throwing the bumper from the side. And then, conversely, even just getting the launcher, just launching it by the side of the dog over and over and over again. You're not going to get too much out of it by doing it the same way, but implementing some of the advice and suggestions that Jordan put out throughout the episode might help create a little bit of variety and spice into your training program, if you will. And after I recorded this with Jordan, I was actually catching up with my buddy Ethan at Standing Stone Supply, and I mentioned to him that we were doing this episode, and he offered up the opportunity to do a discount code on his website, standingstonesupply.com, for the DT Super Pro launcher. So if you're interested in buying a launcher after listening to this, or maybe you just need another one or a replacement, whatever, go to Standing Stone Supply and use code GDIY launch. It's good through the end of July, through the rest of this month. And so that'll save you 15% on the launcher. So that's, appreciate Ethan for offering that up to all the listeners out there. And that gives you an opportunity to kind of get started, if you will. And, yeah, so if you enjoyed this episode, this is your first time maybe checking out GDIY or Gundog It Yourself, check us out on YouTube. This episode is actually airing on YouTube. This is our first podcast to put up on YouTube, and for those listening on the normal podcast outlets or platforms, just know that this is on YouTube, along with a few cut scenes or clips, if you will, of Jordan actually showing or demonstrating some of the drills or setups that he referenced or discussed within the episode. And then those people that are listening to us on YouTube or just found us through YouTube, just so that you're aware, we have almost 200 regular episodes, as well as a bunch of different bonus episodes throughout almost 4 years of doing this on all the other podcast streaming platforms. Just search Gundog It Yourself and you'll find us. You can do that on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple, what have you. And then if you really enjoy the content and you're finding value and you're gaining something from listening to my guests that I have on every single week, please consider joining Patreon at patreon.com/Gundog It Yourself. There's plenty of extra bonus content up there, as well as we're starting to do a few giveaways, such as we're going to be doing some giveaway elite memberships to Onyx, and we just announced the last month's winner, the June winners. That is Steve Billimack as well as Holden Baker. So if you want to join, support the podcast, we can't do this show without the support of Patreon, as well as enter your name into the hat for some giveaways such as Onyx, then by all means, again, it's patreon.com/Gundog It Yourself. And that about does it for me this week. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop and wrap this up. Thanks for checking us out. And as always, thanks for hitting play.